I'm here wearing two hats. I'm a hospice person and have been for several years. I've been the past coordinator and now president of hospice. And our coordinator isn't here. She's taking well-deserved rest this evening. She's been busy all weekend with other hospice events, so I said she didn't need to come and introduce us. We could manage on our own. My name is Marilyn Garvin. I said that. This is Paul Walker. He's a family physician in Nelson. Raeburn Hurst, who is a long-term care assessor. And in the background is Helen De Weaver, who is a community home physio. And our focus tonight will be on choosing to die at home, on how what's available in the community, how that decision is made, and just the general process. And this is going to be very casual, I hope. And feel free to ask questions, interrupt if interrupt me. I'm sure the other three don't mind. And we'll just try to give you as much information as you can. This sometimes is a difficult subject for some people to ask about or talk about. Some people have had experience with a home death, and it can be a wonderful thing if all goes well. Of course, sometimes it doesn't. But I think where we'll start, because the doctor is usually the first one involved with a dying client before it gets to the home care nurses or physio or long-term care, that maybe Paul would like to tell us sort of his role with the dying client from the time they sort of make the decision that it's palliative care and that treatment as a cure is no longer an option, and that they're aiming for just symptom control and comfort, and how then he goes on to make the decision of whether a home death would be appropriate.
Okay. Well, as you can well imagine from what Marilyn's filled in, the decision that palliation is the only option that you have with the patient obviously follows a long evaluative process. It's a process that starts with the first presentation of symptom, evaluation of that symptom, subsequent investigation, very often leading on to investigation both by the family doctor and by specialists, decisions made as to what treatment options are available, initiation of some of those treatments, and the subsequent result that the treatment is not effective, and that you really don't have any other viable options which have a high probability of affecting a benefit to the patient. And in that stage, then you're into the palliative phase of care. Now, a lot of this necessarily takes place in hospital often, especially if, say, a cancer patient that's surgical, or they come back from radiotherapy or whatever treatment. And I guess for us, the sort of acid test as to where a patient is best cared for is judged on the question of when is there nothing more that we can offer a patient that cannot be equally well offered at home. And that judgment takes into consideration a tremendous number of factors. It brings into focus the question of what the support system is at home, both provided by the family or by friends and neighbors, perhaps by Raeburn. Can the home environment be made modified to make it practical for a patient to remain at home longer? Helen fits in here. Marilyn and her team come in there. Basically, it's judged on when there really aren't any when treatments or just plain nursing care is no longer in the hospital, is no longer necessary, and there's a willing support system that will be able to carry the load through to death. And we can talk a little later about how close to death the support system can carry the load, and the sorts of things that we kind of look for in that. But certainly a tremendous amount of the initial palliative care can be handled at home, and then as the burden gets heavier and heavier, sometimes we run out of the ability of our support system to carry the patient. I don't know whether Raeburn, you'd want to pick it up there and sort of go through your evaluation as to what you look for when
I'm Raeburn Hurst, and I work with the Health Unit. And For the purpose of tonight, I realize we're talking about dying at home, and I think that we do recognize that for some people that's not their choice. So we have support systems, whether they die in hospital, in a nursing home, or at home. But for tonight, our discussion is centered on dying at home. And my role primarily is to be part of the team that I work with, and to try and facilitate some support systems that can help a person, if that is their decision, and it's the decision of the person who is dying and the decision of the family, to try and make this practical at home. So the long-term care program usually looks at assessing people eligible for program benefits based on a chronic health concern that limits function. And when we're looking at a person dying at home, obviously they've met that criteria. Some people, the families make this decision once the decision has been made that there's no other treatment for them, and we're going to be looking at trying to support the person at home based on their wish and the ability of the family to try and accommodate that wish. So we say these are the things that could be available, and that's where we expect that people here gain an understanding of trying to support the person into accepting other support systems. We have the informal network, which is friends and family and church, and then we look at what are some of the established support systems and how do they access them. So if the decision is to be at home, sometimes people want to go home right away because it seems a real short time frame, and they want to know, well, how soon can all the systems be in place? And we actually can mobilize support fairly quickly, especially if it's determined that this isn't going to be very long, and so we try then focus on this is the request and what can we do. So we look at accessing homemaker help, and my role as the assessor is to establish the amount of hours that might make a difference in this situation, then to contract with the Nelson Home Support Agency, and they supply the staff. And homemakers can offer a number of things to families. For some families, their decision is that if somebody could come in and do some personal care for the person at home, helping them with a bath, perhaps giving them morning care, perhaps giving them evening care. So we try to work together to say, well, what would make a difference here? Sometimes families initially feel that if they have contact with a nurse, that's all they can accept right now. So that might be home nursing care being involved. Once that part of the team is involved, they say, we've found other people who have found a bit of help from homemakers has made a real difference here. And so from that, once they've accepted sort of one part of the team, they start to feel comfortable with accessing some help within the home. Some families feel very strongly that this is their duty, and they wear themselves right out with trying to give 24-hour care at home. So when we say that homemakers are available, it is based on this need to support the person to the degree that the people will allow that, and also to try and support the person at the very end with comfort measures, whether it's basic personal care issues, or even giving the wife time to even go off and have a rest if it's the wife that's the main caregiver, or husband, whatever the case might be, and so that the homemaker might be doing other tasks such as house cleaning and making up some meals. Often I find families will say, well, I can look after the housekeeping, I can do all that, I don't know what a homemaker would do. And we recognize that they can do it, and we really do, but we try to say that maybe though if you would say, well, if somebody else could do that, I can continue on with other things. So we try and look at how we can sort of facilitate this particular goal to be at home, and then how we can support the person. One of the questions some people ask, is there a cost to that? And I have to say, yes, there is sometimes. Marilyn and I, with her program as well, look at sometimes if it's very short term for a homemaker's support, we look at that being handled through the home nursing care program, and there isn't a cost. There could be a cost when we're looking at this at a longer period of time. It is based on a formula that we use, that if a person isn't on supplement, we do have to do a financial, and then people are advised, though, upfront what this cost could be. So I guess I have to make sure that I state that, yes, there could be a cost, but you have to weigh that to, in the overall scheme of things, how much of a difference is this making. So we do work together, and as I say, I think that in our small community here, I find that the volunteer support is excellent, and we often can put together a package that really doesn't intrude too much on the person's space, but allows them to feel very comforted by a caring community. So I think that I appreciate the people that are here trying to learn more about care of those who are making this choice to be at home at the end. And any one of us could be called to say, well, how can you help? And that's really what we'd like to do. We try to think that we look at the uniqueness of the people and the uniqueness of this situation, and to make sure that people know that this isn't for everybody. People have to discuss this and make a choice, and that's what Dr. Walker was indicating, that you really do come to that conclusion first. What would work here? And sometimes people just can only get home for an afternoon, or sometimes they decide that they can go home for the weekend and then they've changed their mind. So sometimes we don't get all the support systems in place because there's been a change in the decision. But we certainly could try. And I'll be glad to answer any questions afterwards if anybody has any.
So this is about the point where home nursing care comes in, and I've been a community home nursing nurse for 16 years now, I guess. And actually, Paul and I have had quite a few home deaths together. Not that means that every time we show up in the same scene that's going to happen, but we found it really can be quite a rewarding experience if things are done well, planned well, and I think that's probably the biggest role of home nursing care, is to be the liaison person during a planned home death, in that we contact the doctor for symptom control. If they're having a lot of pain, we're in there every day, whereas the doctor may not be. We're the person that may talk to Helen De Weaver about home aids to make the chore a little easier, save wear and tear on the caregiver's back. We spend a lot of time with the family, helping them plan, making sure that they have some idea of what this process is going to be like, so that nothing is going to surprise them too much. I mean, you can't always say that things are going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, because they don't go like that. But you can at least prepare them for some of the eventualities and make that part of it a little easier. We get most of our referrals from the hospital, although we can take a referral from anyone in the community, friends, family. We get referrals from the Vancouver hospitals if they've been down there. So we don't really need to have a doctor's referral, although we will be contacting the doctor after we make an initial visit anyway, so there will be doctors involved. And although I must say that unless there's a medication involved, that we don't need a doctor's order. So if it was just to go in and give a little bit of advice about nutrition or whatever, or caring for a sore back, laying in bed, or that type of thing, we wouldn't necessarily have to contact the physician, but we do like to, because we feel it's a team effort. Raeburn and the doctors and physio and ourselves and hospice and everybody that's with the team really work closely together, and we are in contact a lot. One of the big things that we try to do is to make the experience of home death as painless as possible to everyone involved, not just pain-free experience for the patient. And one way that we do that is we try to plan a home death so that all the avenues are covered. We, with the doctor, talk to the patient and the family about do not resuscitate order, which means no heroics at death if that's what the family wants. Then that should be clearly stated, and we should all know what is expected. If they quit breathing, do they want the ambulance called? Do they want people to try CPR and all that? And the ambulance, if it is called and we do not have this in place, is obligated to try to bring this person back. And most of the time that's a disservice to everyone involved. However, if it is the patient's or family's wish that this is done, then it is done. So that has to be sort of up front. And if the decision is not to have a resuscitation done, then we do get the doctor to sign a form, and that a copy of that goes, actually 4 copies goes to the ambulances, so there's a copy in each ambulance. Family has one in the home, we have one. If homemakers are involved, they should have one as well, so everyone knows what's expected. And a hospice worker working in there should be aware that there's a do not necessitate too, so everyone knows that that's part of what's been planned. We also like them to try to make some funeral plans well before the death, so that it's easier then to arrange than it is afterwards, as far as taking the body from the home to the funeral home and that type of thing, rather than having the ambulance there and then they won't transport the body. So that's all part of the planning that we do. And I think of what else we do at that time. Paul, is there anything else that we discussed with them at that time?
I think the key here, as Marilyn suggested, is to having things go smoothly, is to anticipate problems ahead of time and to plan for them, both in terms of preparing the people you're going to need down the road. Prepare the ambulances for that they may get called, the funeral home know where they're going to have to go under what circumstances. Notify the coroner that this is not to be deemed a coroner's case death, and so we can back off on all the police and everything else that gets involved if it becomes a coroner's case. And just anticipation of the needs of the patient. You know, in the course of his disease, what is he likely to do next? You know, what is this disease likely to do next? Is this a cancer involving liver? Is this somebody who's dying of end-stage heart disease? Is this an AIDS patient who's dying of a pneumonia of some kind? You know, you can sort of anticipate a bit ahead of time. It certainly goes a whole lot smoother if everybody on the team kind of has a pretty good idea of what you can likely expect under this set of circumstances, and you've got all that done ahead of time. It saves the panic at the end, I think.
So anyway, what home care would offer is up to twice daily service, and the government has actually offered a little bit of extra now if it's in a crisis situation during the last 24 to 48 hours of death. We can actually put a nurse in for a longer period of time, perhaps even up to 8 hours, and that can be arranged at the last minute. If I was at someone's home and a crisis came up or they were actively dying, I could phone back to the office and say, I don't want to leave, I can't leave. Could you replace me for the rest of my shift, or I'll stay here for 2 hours. Could you arrange for someone to come out and spend X number of hours after that? And it's that will be a real plus. I know that again with my own experience, there's been many a time when I've walked in just when someone has actively started to die, and it's pretty hard to turn around and walk out. But if you have someone waiting for insulin or someone waiting for other care, you can't stay and you can't go, and it's really very difficult for everyone. So that's we haven't had to use it too often, but I can see where it's going to be wonderful.
That has to be new. I hadn't heard that was an option we had, because certainly getting an extended period of nursing care at the end is sometimes very difficult.
Yes, so that's something that has just come into being probably in the last month or so, and I'm sure it will help everyone, and it'll be nice for the family not to have that disruption. I've been, as I said, been there when someone's been close to dying and said, excuse me, I've got to run out and give some insulin, I'll be back in 20 minutes. And it's really hard for them to waiting there. You know, I know they're looking at their watch, so that'll give me more options and give people more options, because we have seen quite often that the last hour, people think, I can't deal with this by myself. They call the ambulance, they go to the hospital, and then quite often they feel like they've let the system down because the person didn't die at home. And just that little bit of difference can really change things. How many people in this room have ever been with someone that's died? Yeah. So for those of you who haven't, you can imagine how nervous you would be if it was a family member that was dying and you weren't quite sure if you were doing it right or they were doing it right, or how you could make it easier and that type of thing. So I think that will be helpful. And then the other thing we do, as I said, with Helen, she's a Home Physio, and I almost always make a referral to Helen for every palliative care I have, usually earlier on than in the last final stages, just because so many of our clients become total care, and we really want to save the caregivers back. We want to make transfers, even just onto the commode or getting them out of bed, safe for the person who's dying and the caregiver, so that she or he doesn't end up being injured. And there's lots of aids for daily living that are out there that I may or may not be familiar with, but certainly Helen is, and she can do a lot of teaching that, and maybe Helen would like to tell us some of the things she does.
Sure. As the new kid on the block, right? I hope that we have maybe some time to later on get up and look at what I brought with me. But just to say, one of the main concerns is comfort, and often the first thing that you want to look at is comfort in bed when the person is resting. Not only because there's also positioning in a chair and so on, but in bed you want to really look at people having a comfortable spine, and then the other joints follow. And I work a lot with propping people up with pillows and pads and things like that. It's important that they can really relax in that bed and not have to fight strain or pain. And of course then pain control, apart from medication, which I don't have anything to do with, these people do. I do set up sometimes DNS treatments. For those of you who are not familiar with it, I have an example there. Cold packs or warm packs. Cold packs more for an inflamed joint or an inflamed area that is painful. Warm packs more for tight muscles that you want to relax. A lot of the care is also teaching transfers to the family, to the home support, to anybody involved. If it's a simple transfer, just the fact that you have to stand close to the person if you're going to help them and you're going to carry part of their weight or a lot of their weight, that you have to have a wide foot base to have good stability. Those are things that you usually can come up with yourself. But when it becomes a more complicated transfer, then it's a good idea to just ask for a community physio to come in and do the teaching. What else are we doing? Oh yeah, of course, putting in aids in a home. Often if a person can still get up and weight bear some, putting in a walker or crutches, or when the person can still get into a bath and doesn't have to have a bed bath, then it's nice to have a bath seat or a bench. As far as wheelchairs are concerned, particularly when a power chair is involved for a person with a longer lasting ailment, the occupational therapist is really the best person to collaborate with the supplier. But in instances where there isn't an occupational therapist available, a friendly community physio will show up. The regular wheelchair, it's always important to have brakes, and if they aren't there, to know the tricks of what to do, propping the wheelchair up against the wall or a sturdy piece of furniture. Those are the type of things that I go over and look at and teach. So I do have a handout. I don't have enough, but I do have 13 handouts for those people that are interested in what there is to offer. There are sometimes instances where a person loses their speech, and a simple chart that we set up with the help of a speech pathologist can make a world of difference of communicating, being able to point at something instead of straining to for both the helper and the patient, straining to get the message across. Those are little things that we can help with. And of course I'm available for any questions you have, anything I haven't covered.
I think just to mention too, Helen, where you can get these aids, most of them can be borrowed from the Red Cross loan coverage, which is a
I've got that on the
volunteer group.
handout, the Nelson one, which is only Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 1 to 4, and the Castlegar one, which is every afternoon from 1 to 3, or weekday afternoons, I should say. And there are on the handout toll-free numbers for the suppliers in our area.
I have to say that home covered is a tremendous service in your community. That's just a lifesaver. Everything from hospital beds to commodes to...
I do carry some equipment, as you see there, that I have really for people to borrow. In most instances, if it's going to be long-term borrowing and it doesn't cost anything, then I encourage people to either get it from some society or the Red Cross, so that I can free my own up to show it to somebody else. And my equipment is basically to show how it works, so that person can decide whether they want to use it or not. But I will leave a bath lift in for a person if they're stuck in, and they won't have a bath if it's not there. I sit in there leave it.
I think where we're at now is we've got the person home. Paul has made his decision that it's the best place for care at this point. Raeburn's gone and done her magic work and got respite care in there, and home care is in there, and physios come in and see what she could do to make life a little bit easier. Then I guess we get to the follow-up. What do we do there? We've got them home. What happens then? Maybe Paul can tell us again about the physician's role for supporting them at home.
Well, there's a variety of ways in which one can get involved in the palliative care at home, and it's handled by in a lot of different ways by the different physicians. I spend a lot of time doing house calls, and I guess there's sort of my breaking point for home visiting is if I start having to make home visits about more than every 2 days or so because the medical condition is changing that rapidly, then it's sometimes very difficult to stay on top of that. In terms of something that I try to assess whenever I go on home visit is not just the care, the state of the patient, but the state of the caregiver. And it's been my observation over the years that although it can be done by a very superhuman effort, that a single dedicated caregiver has a great deal of difficulties hanging in there to the end. As a person moves from sort of being a normal, functional individual through the stages of dying and becomes more and more dependent until they're total care. It's been my observation that even with all the support, that having a single caregiver, dedicated caregiver in the home, a spouse, that you're in real danger of burning that individual out. And things move so much smoother if you have two dedicated caregivers to spell off. And probably some of the best situations I've been involved in were when there were 3 dedicated caregivers spelling each other off and rotating through. It's because burnout amongst the caregivers is one of the reasons that your patient ends up having to go back to the hospital, that the support system breaks down. And so part of any home visiting is to sort of make sure that your support system is intact and holding up and isn't running to the end of their stick. And again, for that situation, people like Raeburn are excellent in terms of giving a respite break or arranging some time out, or arranging people with hospice workers to come in and spend some time to spell somebody off. It's really valuable. When it comes to the physical care of the patient, basically it's fairly straightforward. It's an extension of what we do in hospital. Understanding that we're no longer trying to cure anything, and you sort of attention to the physical and the psychological environment of the patient, and that just basically breaks down into things like pain control, bowel and bladder control, eating function, mentation, sleep patterns, depressive illnesses, and all those sorts of things, for which we have many potent tools that we can use and play with in that setting. And I have to say that I rely tremendously on my home care nurses to report back to me if they perceive. I put a lot of faith in what they say and that they perceive is going on. And I'm certainly prepared to make changes in a medication regimen without necessarily even laying eyes on the patient based on somebody like Marilyn giving me a call saying this is happening. And In an anticipated home death where we have everything sort of teed up and ready to go, my final function is to come on out and pronounce the individual dead. And that's when Marilyn says she and I meet in some strange place at strange hours, that's very often the occasion. And but if everything's gone well, it's something that the family feels well about and the team feels well about. We can usually sit around with the family after and have some tea and wait for the funeral home to come and take the deceased away. It works out very nicely when it all goes well. Needless to say, there are a lot of things that can fall off the wagon, and Marilyn and I can probably regale you for hours on some of the things that sort of don't work out quite as planned. But that's basically our function. Our function is basically an extension of the office visit environment. I much prefer home visiting for the simple reason that there comes a point where a patient simply, there's a point where it's nice for a patient to come up to the office to visit me, because that's therapeutic as well. You know, they get out, they wander downtown, they socialize, they run into some people on the street. But there gets to be a point where they simply can't move, and it's a heck of a lot easier to move me than it is to move them. And that's pretty much my decision as to when I start going out on home visits.
Yeah, I think that initially, you start off with maybe this decision being made in the hospital. That's what we say that most of the decisions are made with a decision to go home. But often you've given people so much information that they don't pick up on everything, that they start with one thing. They know the doctor will make a home visit, and two, that a nurse is going to come. So again, that's where we start. And sometimes, because they've been given the information that it looks like, sounds like this could happen fairly soon, family members are there. They've taken time off work, and so there's a lot of support initially. And sometimes that's the way it is. Things do unfold rather quickly, and there really hasn't been any other support put in. But it's once the family members have taken their 2 weeks holidays and have to go back home, and reality has kind of set in, the person may need more care at night, and your sleep is interrupted, you start to think that, well, what was that they told me in the hospital, or didn't somebody say I could get some help? And that's when we then start to say, yes, there is, and it usually comes from somebody from the community home care program seeing that this is a real concern. And then we say, yes, we can talk about a homemaker coming in. So I guess I have to say that lots of times people have the information, but it's too much initially, and they have to sort of set their own pace as to when they'll have somebody come in. And often they say, I really don't think I need any help. And so sometimes they have to be encouraged to, like, try it, you might like it, or it might make a difference. And just to give them a break. Some people have just said, if only I could get out for a walk in the park twice a week. And that seems like a very simple request, but it can make a real big difference. Other people do need to have somebody come in each day to give some morning care, assist the person to get up in the chair and so on, because they do have changes in their mobility, and it's a little hard for the one person to look after transferring them, despite being given information from community physio and having been shown easier ways of transfers and so on. So I like to think that, we try and address the needs initially, and then we try and meet those needs whenever we can. And I think that, again, a small caring community is certainly an asset. I don't feel people get lost in the shuffle, but maybe some of you have some experience where somebody really didn't have any information about what to do, and I would hope that we could correct that with gatherings like this, where more people are informed that they can look for some help. Any questions or anything, or any of us?
I'm just wondering whether some of the other doctors make home calls. I know Dr. Walker.
I think they do.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
I have to say I haven't talked to my colleagues to find out how many of them are comfortable doing that, but I know several others do.
And that's usually discussed we have a meeting in the hospital, and usually, as again, we're relating to how it usually happens, and the physician, if he can be there, or if not, we say that that's something you have to find out. We have to determine, will a home visit be made? You have to have these questions answered before you sort of take the person home. But I always want people to know it's not a failure when they're taking help. It's not a failure if sometimes things at the very end do change and you have to make another decision. If people can look at it as another decision, that they tried their best family has pulled together, and we've supported this as long as we can, and you may have to make another decision, but again, for tonight, we're talking about supporting that person at home and saying that that is where these people are going to be managed at home until the end.
So probably the biggest thing there's two things probably that I found, and probably Paul has too, that actually make people go to the hospital. One is pain that we can't get under control, and the other one is shortness of breath. And I would think those are the two biggies as far as people not being able to continue at home. And pain control is really good these days, but there still is the odd time when you can't get the pain under control with what we have available in the community. And we have the CAB pump, which is a computerized pump that pumps a small amount of the painkiller in under the skin at a computerized rate, and that's really successful, probably with almost all the pain you can get, with about as bad as it can get. You can usually control it with that, but even then, sometimes it just isn't. And then Paul or the other doctors will usually bring them in and put them on intravenous morphine where they can get a larger dose. And I think thinking still is Paul, right, that there's no upper limit of what they can have to control.
Pain control is actually very simple. You give them a little whack of morphine. If it's not enough, give them more. And, there's no upper limit.
How many of these machines have you got now?
I think there's 4 at the hospital, plus we can get them on loan from one of the companies within 24 hours.
Could you do with more?
We're not using the ones we have as often as we can.
I think they're underutilized at this
Yeah,
point.
they are. And we're not quite sure why. It's
They use them in England all the time. They just want to use even patients when they're out, they've got them fast.
Yeah, I think what Marilyn alluded to is that there were 2 patient-generated reasons for why a hospital is sought as the disease goes on. Certainly shortness of breath and pain, which are in some ways, I guess, somewhat similar, are 2. But my experience is more often that it's not patient-generated reasons to take them to the hospital at the end, it's caregiver reasons. And it's the patient becomes unconscious. And the time of unconsciousness death can be anywhere from a few hours to 2 or 3 days, and sometimes that period of time is very difficult on family to sort of carry them over that hump. The other reason, the other thing that sort of the burnout things for caregivers seem to be when a patient loses control of bowel and bladder, and those can be really tough to deal with if you're having to strip the bed every 2 hours and look after that, and that'll certainly kill a caregiver off pretty quick. Finally, I think there's probably more caregiver burnout in terms of just lack of sleep. I mean, if a caregiver's sleep is being disrupted repeatedly through a night, a single caregiver who can't get a night's sleep in a week isn't going to last very long.
It seems there should be more, perhaps like you said, of planning beforehand as much as you can, and then sort of having it open-ended to make plans as you go on for health. So I think sometimes people aren't quite prepared for what's really going to happen, and they don't realize the stress of it all.
I think quite often, I don't think anybody puts a time limit really on it, but sometimes they'll say you've probably got a month left, and would you like to go home as long as you can? And a year later, the person is still at home, and everybody's given up their life, and they put it on hold, and it's a long time to sustain that kind of care, and some of them are total care for a year, and that's really, really hard. It burns everyone out. It burns out the nurses, it burns out the doctors, it burns out everyone. Not that we expect people to die on schedule, but it really is really hard to sustain that level of care and caring. How many people, take a leave of absence of your job to go home and stay with mom and dad for a month or 2, and then just, then after a month or 2, nothing's changed, but they can't stay any longer, they can't go, and that's really difficult too, I think, for people.
And you don't realize this at the big outset of it all. And that's how it is.
Murphy's Law says they die 2 days after they get home, and then you're sort of stuck saying you didn't realize that the patient was only staying alive to sort of spend the time with the family.
Is it possible for a person to go home and then when it's too much for the caregiver, for the patient to go back into the hospital for a period?
Anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah.
And then return home
Yeah,
when the...
and if in fact the burden is going to be a long one, although they often end up at the hospital, if it looks as though we know that they aren't going to be able to go home again because we've exceeded the caregiver capability, rather than keep them in an acute bed in our hospital for what is really palliative care, we'll often transfer them out to Mount St. Francis or Willow Haven. Her job.
Yeah, I was saying, because our discussion tonight was at home, I wouldn't elaborate on this, but it is true. Sometimes, again, these time frames, when Marilyn was talking about things sort of flowing and things working really well, it's usually those that it's kind of maybe a 2-week period, and people have understood what could happen. They have had time to get the various forms signed, and the community members that need to know. Family is there, there's some support, whether it's from homemakers and so on, and hospice, and then there's a conclusion. It's when it goes on for a long time, and as you say, eventually it's often the caregiver that we can't seem to support this situation any longer. And so some people think, well, now, yes, it's the hospital, and they do go there. And then my role is to look at the ability for a chronic care hospital to meet this person's needs. And sometimes that's difficult for families when they say, well, I promised my spouse or my brother or my sister that I'd never do that. And so at any time of life when you're making change, I always hope that we do communicate our needs and our wishes and then try and explain them, because sometimes it's very hard for the spouse then to have to make that decision to, one, send them back to hospital, and then further to have to go to a chronic care hospital. They're feeling that, that wasn't part of the plan. But sometimes, again, it's another experience moving into another environment, and then they build their relationships and their trust there and find that, they can come in daily, or they can make arrangements to make that home-like. No matter where they are, we like to think that we can change the environment a bit. Even in hospital, they have the room that can make it more comfortable for a family to visit at any time and have anybody there and so on, and they do the same in a chronic care facility. But certainly at home, if both people agree, sometimes the caregiver just doesn't feel confident to do this, and then carrying a lot of guilt when the husband says, I want to go home, and she just can't do that. So sometimes we meet more than once to say, well, how about trying an afternoon? Could you try that and see how that goes? And sometimes that worked out, and then they say, well, I'll try a weekend, and that worked out. And so sometimes it's kind of an open door. They're out for a while and back for a while, and then the decision is, I think I can keep them home. It looks like, feels like I can manage that for a while. And I think we never want people to feel that they made the wrong decision. They made the right decision for that time, and they may have to change that. But to be open, you say any of our instructions are supposed to be, this is advice. We can't make the decision for you, but we would try to support them wherever they are. I sometimes find it hard looking at a chronic care facility, because then people do sometimes attach that that's where Dad died, and they feel that then that's the institution. If they have another experience, that, how can you say that they can be maintained there? My only memory is that that's where this family member went to die. And that's hard on people when they think of an institution as a place. Because palliative care happens there. We don't move the people out of their nursing home environment, their home, unless they can't be managed there, and it's often caregivers, again, there that can't manage that particular senior.
One of the areas I think where hospice workers can be very, very helpful to us is in monitoring the sort of psychodynamics that's going on in the home in which they're sitting as quiet observers or active talkers with patients, and because psychodynamics can become a little strange as death goes on, and I sometimes am astounded at how insensitive a dying patient is to the actual condition of the caregiver, to how absolutely fatigued or beat they're looking, and to the demands they're placing on them, and in fact you can get the situation where in fact the dying patient actively uses guilt as a tool of manipulation in that setting. And if somebody can identify that and point it out to myself or to Marilyn, that's something that's important to recognize and know what's going on. And Because then you sure need to get in on your caregiver again and try and give them some backup and some help. And it's just none of us really, aside from perhaps a hospice worker who has many hours in a home, sort of gets to sit and just listen to the interplay that goes on in the family around the care of that patient. And it's sort of a nice fly on the wall kind of a situation just to monitor and see if there's some way you can.
Is there an increase in people wanting to have their folks at home now to die?
I don't know. I mean, for me, it just needs to come in fits and starts. Statistically, I don't know.
I would say so from my point of view, as far as nursing goes, I've seen.
How about hospice referral? Are hospice referral climbing?
They go up and down again. Last year we had a real heavy year, and then it was over the winter. It's been quiet now. It's been
This
busy
is what
again.
said the meeting on Thursday in Casper, with the various places in Casper, they sort of have a busy cycle and then they have a time when it's quiet. But,
Well, practice is like that too, you know. They have.
but they're being, the hospice room, they've got a new one in Casper.
It's weird.
I'm just going to, Marilyn, could you elaborate for those who are interested in hospice, what a hospice worker might be expected to do while they're there? But they're not there to vacuum. What are they there to do?
They're there for probably two things, for the client and for the family. To offer support, emotional, spiritual in some cases, or to, again, work with the other members of the team they may see them more often than we do, and if they notice that there's a lot of stress with the caregiver, we really hope that they'll pass that information on to the other caregivers so that we can deal with it. They can deal with it that way too. They can be there for blocks of 4 hours perhaps, so that the husband and wife can go out bowling, go shopping, go and do that type of thing. Homemakers can do that too if they're hired for respite, but they're not generally available in the evening or quite as on an impromptu basis. That if someone decides they need to go downtown on Tuesday afternoon, they can quite often phone their hospice worker and say, look, I really got to go, can you come? And they can, whereas the homemaker, that has to be arranged and scheduled and everything, so it's very good that way. They can also, something else the homemaker can't do, they can follow their care into the hospital. They can offer respite to the family in the hospital. I was going to say they can offer night vigils, and they can, very limited amount. We've got so few homemakers, hospice workers, that we really can't offer that. There's very few of our hospice workers that could spend an 8-hour night at the hospital for 4 nights in a row. It's just, if they're not working, then they're retired and don't have that level of energy to be able to do that. And that's one of the things, I think, Paul, to answer your question, I think our hospice workers would be used a lot more. We could offer ongoing night vigil, because that's a problem in the home and in the hospital as well. But at this point, we're not equipped to be able to do that. We don't go in and do dishes. We don't go in and scrub floors. We did have one lady that was going in and cleaning the deep freeze and serving tea to all the friends, and for about 6 months until finally said, look, you got to just, and then the lady told her she didn't need it anymore. She couldn't do those things, which was rather heartbreaking. But it was a lesson well learned for all of us to really make it quite clear and I think Marie does do that when she does do meets with the family, that this is what they're here to do. This is not what they're doing. Miriam is one of our hospice workers, and some of our, wants me to lose your name, and I know Amy, yes, they're both hospice workers here in Nelson, and so they're both experienced at this.
I think one of the other things hospice workers do with a home death, for example, and following to the hospice, we also do the grief support and follow up after the client has died. Make visits back to the family, and often you've made a bond with those members of the family. You don't just say, it's been nice, and not go back. You follow it up, and it's really quite rewarding. It's very nice.
Is there still a grief support group here in Nelson?
But we're very underutilized. It's we had a small group to start with, and they've all grown past that and gone on their own way. But we've had someone mention to us that the problem might be partially that it's in the evening, and a lot of people don't want to go out in the evenings, you know, especially elderly or even people. So we are going to try to start a grief support in the afternoon sometime soon. And we're also going to be starting a teen youth grief support as well, in conjunction with the peer group at the hospital. So that'll be something new in the next year.
Yeah, I think that's a function that actually has been scattered around through the mental health agencies in town as well. There's a lot of access to different avenues for grief support.
We refer back and forth a lot, actually. We get referrals from the mental health, and we send people that come to our grief support group that need more. When they stay with our group, but we feel that they need more than what we can offer, and we refer them on to mental health. So again, it's all part of the team. Part of the mental health group is the elderly outreach, and we will use that for the family of the dying client as well as the dying client themselves quite often. One thing you might notice is the absence of a nutritionist here. One of the biggest problems we run into when someone's near the end of their life is people insisting that they've got to eat. And it can take a lot of quality time out of a dying person's life when someone's fighting with them. You've got to eat more, you've got to eat more. You know, how are you going to get better, or how are you going to keep your weight up if you don't eat? And early on, there is a place for nutritionists for high calorie, high protein, high everything drinks. But towards the end, we'll talk, after we have a brief break, we'll talk about the actual dying process a bit. And that's just part of what goes, is the appetite and the ability to eat. And I've been in homes where, I guess it's usually women, they're really focused in on you've got to eat. You know, I think it goes back when their kids are little, if they're not eating, they're worried. And they'll actually fight with their partner about, look, you've only had 2 glasses of juice today, you've got to drink more. And they're saying, I don't want it, but you've got to. And it causes a lot of friction to be there. So it's...
Yeah, I think I've said it before in these groups, and I'll certainly reiterate it, and that is that I think that dying, at least of cancer, is usually a death by starvation as much as anything else. And just progressive ebbing of appetite and ebbing of energy and a wasting away of weight, loss of weight. I mean, all loss of weight, it reflects as the fact that energy out exceeds energy in. And there are many reasons for that, but anorexia or just loss of appetite is a major part of it. And many people will fade away just on that alone.
How about in the second half, why don't we just answer questions? I think I prefer that myself. I find it easier to answer something than to talk, and I don't know how you, yeah?
The dying process at home and what it's like, and relieve some people's fears that it's not necessarily ugly and pleasant, scary, what they could expect, at least in a layman's terms.
Well, from my point of view, I guess various types of illnesses have sort of various, with their complications, have sort of various patterns that are fairly predictable with variation. And so if you can anticipate ahead of time that somebody is going to, but even just telling people that they're going to become weaker and kind of what kind of time frame and what do they have to think about in terms of, if the person starts to stumble and fall, don't worry about that. You're going to expect that. Their pain needs may go up, or they're going to turn yellow in a few days' time, or
Lose their appetite.
yeah, they're going to lose their appetite. It just makes it easier on the caregiver if they know that that's kind of, this isn't a new sudden symptom of something that they haven't anticipated. This is part of what we're expecting to see happen in the process, and there are things you can do about them, and what you can do and what you can't do for them. And again, try to tell them if you lose your appetite, well, don't try and stuff that person with sort of greasy sausages. It's it's normal. It's really a lot of reassurance. I mean, I really feel badly for the caregiving team, because they're often breaking their backs, and it's the first and only time they've ever done it. Maybe the first and only time they ever do it, and they really don't know if they're doing it right. It's like raising your first kid, There's a tremendous amount of insecurity and uncertainty when you're doing it, and it takes a lot of reassurance that you're doing a great job. And boy, I tell you, anybody who can hang in there and through to the end, it's really needs to be commended for doing a great job. It's a stress, and hopefully it's one they'll look back on positively in the future and say, well, I did that. And then maybe some other time you can go on and say, well, that's something I can give to other people, and I can become a hospice worker.
Yeah, it comes part of life's experience.
Yeah, it just adds to the richness of the life experience.
But there are signs that when death is imminent. What are they? I mean, when it's time to call the family from the hospital, that kind of thing. I mean, there must be definite signs of when time is extremely limited. What might they be?
Well, you and I both have our own criteria. I guess you always have to tell the family that there may be sudden unexpected events, like hemorrhage, which will end the thing very quickly, or vomiting and aspiration in a lung ends things very quickly. And at a time like that, the most terrible thing you can do is to maybe give them a shot of morphine to relieve their distress and let them go. But in terms of the sort of the slow progressive deterioration, I guess starting at death, coming backwards, I guess usually the last sort of pre-morbid event is probably lapsing into unconsciousness, and now the last sort of conscious contact that a patient has with you, and that can be, that means the cessation basically of medications, of food, and of fluids. You're not going to get anything into them. We're at home, we're not going to set up IVs, and I'm not sure it's appropriate even if they're in the hospital when they hit that point. And so, the human body can't survive long without basically fluid is the main thing. And so you're down to anywhere from a few hours to maybe 2 or 3 days, usually before a patient will die from that point in time when they stop responding to food and fluid needs. Sometimes you can anticipate, I guess in a sense it's more having watched the patient and watched the tempo of their illness, to sort of understand whether this seems to be going very quickly, or I think sometimes a lot of this towards the end, where if you've been involved with a lot of people dying, you understand that this is going to spin off, as they slip from level to level now, it's going to start to accelerate. And sometimes families caught terribly unawares that over a matter of 2 weeks they sort of slip off a previously stable ledge and they just don't catch on another one all the way down. And the family said, oh darn, if I'd known they were going to die that fast, I'd have done this, or I'd have said that, or I thought I had more time. And I guess you sort of judge the sort of the pace at which they're getting yellow. Anything you can think of, Marilyn? Any other cues that you use?
Are you thinking of just before they die, like within
Yes,
hours?
like the hospital called my parents when my granny was dying and said, you better come because your mother's dying tonight. And I wonder how they knew.
There's usually changes in breathing. Their breathing will get, they get something called chain strokes, where they breathe very shallow and then deeper and farther apart, and then they stop, and then the whole system starts over again. And eventually they just don't get that breath after the pulse is gone. The pulse will get quite irregular and what we call thready, where it's harder and harder to feel, so it comes and goes and comes and goes. And probably you wouldn't notice, but a nurse might, that their eyes are more fixed than what they normally were. Color changes, they get cold and mottled. Usually their feet are very, very, very cold. And that's another thing that people do. They feel this coldness from the body and they want to heat blankets up. And then quite often, I don't know, I've seen it so often where, I don't know why, but they kick all their covers off. They don't want anything on. There must be an internal heat or something. I don't know, balls or physiological.
I don't have an explanation.
But it happens so often.
The weight of the clothes.
Yeah, and that's one thing I do tell families at home is don't be alarmed if every time you cover them up, they're uncovering themselves again to the point where a lot of times they're totally naked. They just don't like
A lot of them are sort of so tremendously stressed that they're actually sweating, even though they're just skin and bones. They're actually sweating from the tremendously high metabolic rate if it's a cancer that's destroying them, or an infection that's being untreated and being allowed to run its course. They'll have a very high metabolic rate and they'll be hot. Yeah, these are all sort of refinements of once they hit the point of being unconscious, then you have respiratory and circulatory changes, and those are the two things which are going to define death ultimately, and they through a cycle. I really try not to crystal ball very far ahead. I find that kind of a destructive process, and how much longer that. But I don't know. I can tell you it'll be a week to a month, or a month to a year, but inside that I really don't want to guess, because you're always going to be wrong.
And I think that to answer your question, how does the hospital know? And that I think they don't always know, but they think maybe I better call the family to make sure, and that happens. Sometimes families are called many times. I think of people in nursing homes where there's this sense that there's a change in this person, and whether the extremities are mottled or the discoloration, the breathing pattern has changed, and you just know there's a difference. And you're on evenings and you kind of think, gosh, maybe there will be an event during the night. I should maybe call the family. So you kind of agonize first by yourself, whether should I call them again. And it's nice actually if families have indicated, please call us anytime, or please don't call me during the night. I'm by myself, I'd have to drive, and you have to sort of know those things, the sort of the styles of the individual. But it's certainly true that having been a nurse for quite a long time, almost as long as Marilyn, I think that you learn more every time. You sort of think that I think this is it, or this might be the time, and I think that, as Paul is saying too, that crystal ball just doesn't always work. But you sort of start to get a feel for, I think this is the time, so your percentage is that you might be right half of the time, and the other times at least family has had a chance to come together to this event that could take place and sort of rethink, what would I do if it did happen, if they've never had a discussion. So I think that sometimes these calling the family out is a learning experience for everybody. And we've often said, my goodness, that family's been called so often, and here we are, this is the real event this time.
Sometimes too, clients, patients have a real hidden agenda they can't express, and there's something for that inner spiritual side that for whatever reason, for medical reasons, you think they won't last till morning and they'll go on for a week, and sometimes they're waiting for a loved one to arrive in Germany. Like they have a hidden agenda that you're not aware of, and I can see a doctor not really being able to predict, because for no apparent reason this person shouldn't be with us any longer, and they hold on for their own reasons. Unfinished business.
Anniversaries and birthdays are very, very interesting.
So you have to respect that or expect it.
I was going from here to France where my aunt was, and she was waiting. The minute I entered, she died.
Yeah.
She knew it. She was not even in the same house. She just said, oh, now she arrived.
That happens. And
she was supposed to die weeks.
The uniqueness of the human spirit, and you won't find that in some text or anything else like that, except that as you have experiences, you start to realize, or they brighten up towards the end. The family said, we had a wonderful day yesterday. She asked, how are the kids? How is everybody? And this can be at home, and they just talked about everything. So they have that wonderful memory, because the next day they're not there, and that kind of thing. So I find that they're just sort of extra blessings, if you will, when maybe they've had this wonderful experience, or else they've had a gathering. I think of even my own dad, it was a sudden death, but for whatever reason we'd all got together, and I had a sister from Montreal that came out, and we all went to, it was Harrison Hot Springs at that time, and it was just great. We all got together, all our families and kids and everything else, and a week later he was dead. So we look back and say, well, I wonder, we don't know, but
did he know?
Yeah, you sort of remember those things. I think all of you would have had an experience where you could remember something rather unique about that.
Or sometimes when you're with somebody who's preparing for that transition, they will talk to people that you can't see. They will actually converse with a loved one that went on before, and they're really at peace, and it's like a real blessing to be part of that. Like maybe you're feeling a bit like an intruder, but it's really an honor to watch somebody go through that process naturally. Like it's really quite it's not scary, it's quite comfortable, because there's a feeling that this is right, that they're ready to go, and that you've helped that process by making them comfortable.
In terms of planning here, there's something that all of us should think about, particularly if we're getting involved, and that is the living will, which is a tremendously helpful tool for instructing people as to how one would like to be treated at the time in that period of time between when they're not able to talk for themselves and they die, and somebody else is being asked to make decisions referable to their health. It's a tremendous guilt-relieving tool and a nice guidance tool for somebody to have that in their hand and say, well, this is what he would have wanted, and I will do that for them. And I certainly that's part of the the sort of the put your affairs in order talk that comes on when you face somebody out and you say, I'm sorry, we've gone as far as we can here, and this is gonna kill you, and eventually, perhaps, and maybe think about putting things in order now. Think about putting out a living will, giving people guidance, or above all, make sure you got a will. Period.
Do you find that shortly before their death that a lot of patients will refuse medication?
Well, yeah, they can. They can. They refuse it, and they refuse food. I think at the same, usually at the same time. If they're having a lot of pain, they'll seldom refuse pain medication, but there are a lot of other things that we can stop. But yeah, that's a part of their making their choices and moving on.
Now, some of them, you're always amazed that they're ready to let go, but I'm sure you've had experiences where you hear people saying, you encourage the person, it's okay, and the wife says to the husband, you can go, you can let go, or if it's a younger person, how hard that is, but sometimes people are hanging on, and you almost have to give them permission. I think you've heard these discussions before on popular TV programs and everything, but I think just to sort of have that communication skill that allows you to sort of recognize that maybe they're feeling they're staying for you, and to be able to say it's okay. It's okay if you need to make this transition. Sometimes you can't say the word, but whatever you need to say it's okay. I can manage, or I can do things. And I think that hospice workers, if people are involved in that particularly, their skills go beyond just being there for the person. That sometimes they're the sounding board. The person will talk to that person who they don't really know that well, but they don't want to bother the wife or the husband or the child or whoever's looking after them. And sometimes it's important that if you say, as you're listening, I think this is important for your wife to hear this. Do you mind if I say that? Because sometimes they want to hold you in confidence, or this conversation in confidence, but sometimes, I know it's certainly been my experience as a nurse, sometimes they'll say things, and it really would be nice if the family member knew that, or the daughter knew that they're remembering an event that was very special, or they said, I hope they have a good party when I go. Well, if these were teetotalers and they didn't have a good party or didn't know how to have one, it's kind of a shame that somebody didn't have that wish.
It goes back to just being sensitive to the psychodynamics that's going on in that particular situation. Perhaps acting as an intermediary or identifying a problem and being able to sort of manage it.
One of my friends died at home, and I spent a lot of time with the family. And he'd always said he never wanted to be cremated, he never wanted to be buried, etc. And then towards the last week, he started saying he wanted a friend of his to weld, who I'm talking about, wanted to weld a little metal box for his ashes. And his wife kept saying, but he never wanted to be cremated, he wanted to be buried. And I said, well, ask him once. She said, I can't. So finally I had to go in and I said, do you want to be cremated? He said, yes. I said, can I tell your wife that? He said, yes. So I went, he wants to be cremated, get the box built. But she just couldn't, that was just too hard for her to ask. The same thing I had to ask him she wanted to keep him at home, but she didn't want to ask him if he wanted to stay home to die. So I was intermediate there. I was sort of the hospice worker, home care nurse combined in that situation. But that brings up something else to my mind too, and I know Miriam's heard this before. Probably for the number of palliative care patients I've been involved with, I've probably got higher than average percentage of being there for a home death, and I swear that right, Paul? Don't you laugh. I swear they wait for me.
I think she's right.
And
It's how wonderful to receive.
well, I don't mean it in a negative way. I really think that I walk in, I mean, I don't spend nearly as much time as I used to with them.
They know everything's in good hands when you
I think
arrive.
that's it, and I think it's because I work more often than a lot of people too, and a lot of these took place in the rural area, and I spend a lot of my own time there. But I'd walk in, and they've been the same way all day, and they just sort of.
Yeah, I don't know why they wait for you to hemorrhage though.
That was another story, and this was a mutual client of Paul's, and mine. Paul was out of town at the time, otherwise he might have been there. But this woman she was a funny little lady, actually.
A delightful lady, yeah.
Yes.
Delightful old timer.
Yeah, except she didn't like that many people, and her and my connection were dirty jokes.
Yeah.
And that's how we sort of kept our relationship. I tried to have a new one for her every time we went. Hers were much franker than mine, but I was going away on holidays, and I think she'd fired every other nurse that had been in there. She'd fired most of her hospice workers, and her and I still got along really, really well. And I went in there one day, and it was expected, I guess, Paul, that she might die. And we figured she was going to
There's a lung
hemorrhage,
tumor that she was.
but nothing sort of showing it was going to happen that day. And I went in and had tea with her, and told her I was going away on holidays, and I had to go back see her in 2 weeks. And she said, "Oh, can you stay just for a few more minutes?" And I said, "Sure, yeah." She said, "Just sit down in bed and talk with me for a while." So I did. She just sort of looked at me and went to death. And there was no signs before that or after that, and she was comfortable with me, I was comfortable with her, the whole thing was quite comfortable. But if I'd left and that happened 5 minutes after that, her husband would have been there alone to deal with this. And I swear that there was no other reason for me to have stayed that extra 5 minutes. I almost thought, well, might as well get it over with now, Marilyn's here. And she'll look after this. Away we went, and it's coincidence, but was it real? It's really amazing, and I guess it's the same thing as waiting for a family member to get there. I think there are some choices there, just amazing.
It's your effect on people there.
Yeah, so more goes on with these people than I really know.
Maybe you'd say that you see a lot of people that live to.
Yeah, live to see me. Oh yeah, that doesn't happen, but everybody has to.
Could you all share some of your experiences about the positive aspects of home death? Maybe comparing it to what it is, how it differs from a hospital death?
Well, again, as Marilyn alluded to at the start, there are those which go very, very well and are really beautiful occasions for family to come together and to meet and to have the dying person in the home and to be there at the time, and they become social occasions and grief sharing occasions, and some tremendous testaments to family strength and values, and something that would be much tougher in a setting like a hospital. It's tough to get 8 kids and their families all in the same hospital room around you, whereas in a house, the family can be lined up out in the living room or sitting around having coffee in the living room, and people circulating and checking on you. It's much nicer. It can certainly, at its best, be a tremendously rewarding time. At other times, the strain can almost break people, and it can be a very shattering time for an individual as well, and especially if they don't have an extended support system. So I much prefer a very nicely managed of a death at home where the family all feels they've contributed and they've all shared and been part of the process. I think it's a tremendously gratifying experience.
And yet there are people who just either the supporting person at home or the dying person himself or herself can feel so much more secure in a hospital, and so the whole thing can be turned around too. And I think what Raeburn was saying too is we do try to answer to all needs. And if a person, particularly caregiving person, but maybe even the patient, really expresses that they want to be in hospital, then you support that too.
And I think that's why the hospice rooms have been developed, and that has a lot to do with, changes in our way of thinking and thinking about death, because there's certainly a large segment of society that doesn't want to let go, and we've got some then trying to think that this is a natural progression of life, if you will, that there's a beginning and there's an end, and it does have to happen at some time. And so we try to make the dying experience, unless it's a catastrophic event where you have no planning, but that can be planned in a nursing home, in a hospital, and that's why, as I say, they have the room with some furniture in there. The home is more appealing if everybody can sort of feel comfortable with that. There's often more space and people can move around, and you can, have your favorite drink or your favorite whatever sharing with your family member. But even in, I find that the hospital and chronic care facilities more and more looking at trying to make it as home-like as possible, to let the kids come in, whatever it takes, the pet or the dog or cat, or, especially in chronic care facilities. So I think if you have an awareness that you can make it home-like in almost any setting, that helps a person.
I think the key is if you have all the planning and all the information, and then the bottom line is the best decision is made for in the interest of that family and client. It doesn't much matter as long as it's all been looked at and everybody's educated and informed. And for some, they want to know there's a bell to ring, that there's a nurse that will come, and that's what makes that death experience more pleasant. So you want to, meet those needs and not push your own feelings or thoughts on them.
Exactly. And I think we try to encourage people that they have some choices. Even if they have said, okay, this is the only thing I can cope with, is the person being in hospital, then we try those passes. Can you try a pass? Can you try maybe an overnight? I think the ones I've struggled with is if it's a younger person and nobody's kind of talking, you can't really predict for sure, but when you know certainly some of the systems involved, and you can see, deterioration, and nobody's asked, did she want to go home? Like, there's education along these lines. Has she talked to her young children? Is anything, those are the struggles I get concerned about. Gee, we think this person could go home for half a day or something or other, and family kind of afraid to do that. What if she got sick, or what if she, so we do have, a lot of education at times. We maybe don't make any plans, but somebody has to be able to do some talking and sharing.
I think that's one of the reasons I got involved with hospice, was I lost a very dear friend in the hospital, and we were doing 24-hour bedside vigils. He was never alone. There was always a family member or a friend, and we had a calendar, and everybody knew what time they were to be at the hospital and for how long and who was going to come next. And we had a private room, and it was very homey, it was very comfortable. But after he died, I was sitting with his wife, and she said, I just wish he could have died at home like he wanted to. And nobody had asked, nobody knew. Hospice hadn't been brought in, nobody was aware that that was his last wish. He wanted to go home. And the only person he'd expressed it to was his wife, who happened to be Iranian and didn't know the system as it existed. And I didn't know the system. And then it was only later it became apparent that he could have been at home. There was no reason for him to be in the hospital. And that really hurt, because we could have met his last wish. He could have died at home. And then that sort of got my interest going when I became aware that there were channels and there were needs that could be met in the community. And I still, I sort of sometimes think this is a gift to him, is that we're doing it for others.
Sure. I think there's a tremendous amount that can be done in the home environment, and Helen certainly talked about to set it up. I think one of the main things that I've seen is to take over the living room. I don't know why, a lot of my patients seem to maybe live down on North Shore, and they have a beautiful view out the front window of their living room, and they'll take over the living room, and make the living room the sick room, and set them up in front of the window, and I can sit and look at the lights down the lake and watch the water lap up on the shore, and where there's room to move around the bed and there's lots of room for everybody, they just turn the living room for that period of time into a sick room. And
that's another thing, is some people don't have proper room or facilities to move around a bed or anything.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I mean, a hospital bed doesn't fit in very many places, but living rooms will usually fit.
yeah, but some of the rooms, like, you know, some, there's nothing tomorrow. There's hardly any room that very well, so
It's hard.
yeah.
You were asking about good experiences. That one with my friend I was talking about earlier was, it really was good. We started off by brought all the family together, and we had a family conference saying, what do you want to do? This is what you can expect. Can you handle it? And we sort of went from there right down to, there was a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old in the house at the time. And we involved them in a lot of not discussions, but we never hid anything from them. We got a hold of some hospice books for children, read them to them, and he died at home in his bed. His wife was sleeping beside him. I stayed overnight. And she said, how did you know he was going to die? I said, I don't know. I just got feeling again. At 7 o'clock, we dropped in to see him, and I said to Brian, I'm going to stay here tonight. And Bob had sat up and talked to him. And so I went to bed, and I woke up at 12 and peeked in, and he was fine. I woke up at 5 to 2 and walked in just time to call his daughters who were sleeping in the other room, and his wife was saying, time to wake up and say goodbye. And his cat was curled up against him. His wife was curled up against him. 2 little kids weren't there. They'd stayed home. But the whole family was there, and actually I quite often get them to come out and talk to groups about their experience with the home death, but they're a little too shy to come out for such a big group. But just an example of how well they did with the children involved in them. The day of the funeral, the minister, who should know better, said, oh, Grandpa's gone to sleep. And the girl looked at her and said, he's not asleep, he's dead. You know, who told you that? This is a complete mistake. She'd get lonesome for Grandpa, and she'd just go in and curl up on his pillow, and there was no fears. I mean, it's never easy, and I'm sure anybody here that's been there when someone's died, it doesn't matter if you've been sitting there watching the changes in their breathing, and you could be told, they're just about gone, they're going to be gone. That last breath is still really tough to watch, because as long as it's that next breath coming, it's not quite over, but once that last breath comes, it is hard, and people do go to pieces, and they cry, and then they always say, oh, I don't want to carry on this way. My response is, if you lived with somebody that long and care about them, I'd be more upset if you didn't cry and carry on. So, but that was a beautiful experience, and I've had some that were less beautiful for various reasons, and usually lack of support to the caregiver, where it just ended up being an enormous strain on them, and sometimes they'll carry on beyond where they should, because they've made this promise. They said they would keep them home, and in spite of everything the nurses can do, the doctor can do to change that idea that they've got, they still can't sort of let it go.
That's the guilt, psychodynamic guilt.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when somebody says, this is what I want, we don't know what we're asking. And only when you're placed in that position, and then the caregiver says, it's important to give them that support and say, it's okay to say, I can't cope. You didn't know what you were saying when you said yes. And to give them that much support and say, you've done your best. And you're not giving their loved one and doing them any favors by having them hospitalized.
Yeah.
It's really important to support them in that decision that the patient has to go back to the hospital, because they have enough to deal with without guilt.
But it's good that we have the choices nowadays, and there's more and more support, because I think 10 years ago there was very little choice that way of staying at home. And I think for some people it definitely is the better way for the families and the person who's dying.
It's perhaps going through a cycle, and 50 years ago,
That was the way it was.
that was the way it always was. Everybody died at home, and then we went through the sterile death,
Yes, yes.
and now evolving back to sort of just a recognition that's part of the process.
There are still some doctors that are very uncomfortable with the concept of home death. They just don't, I don't know whether they can't support the client in their home or what it is, but there are some that still offer resistance to it, and unless you've got that support of your family physician, it's pretty hard to stay home. You really
It's
need
got to be
them.
a team.
It's got to be a team, and the doctor's very important. And it doesn't matter whether we can contact them by phone and get orders. There has to be that the presence of a doctor saying it's okay to be here. And again, the same family, a lot of their friends were putting a lot of pressure on her. Put him in the hospital, put him in the hospital. You're not doing him any favor by keeping him home. Maybe they can do something else in the hospital, even though everybody knew they couldn't. And, she would just sort of lose it, and I go out there and she'd say, people are saying to me, get him in the hospital. Okay, well, what do you think they could do in the hospital? Does he want to go in the hospital? No. Do you want him in the hospital? No. What do you think that they could do in the hospital? Well, my friend's got a daughter who's a nurse that says. I said, well, you've got a friend that's a nurse who says. So just,
Yeah, very often part of my function going out is just to tell them they're doing a great job, and this is just fine. You're doing, this may be your first time through this, but you're doing a great job. I've got nothing to offer you that you can't do here. And just sort of legitimize what they're doing. And
For
make
example,
sure that's
hospice
important.
can't even go in the hospital unless the doctor approves.
you have to have a doctor's order still in the hospital too, as a client.
I'd be surprised if you ever found that was denied.
It has been recently.
Yeah, no.
Within the last year, it was denied to me.
The
The doctor said no.
Yeah, they had arranged it. She went up and the doctor said she would be in the hospice, which is rather unusual.
Well, that's okay. Then you go up as a friend.
Yeah. I would either get
I think when we were talking about, supports and that, and we were initially sort of talking about dying at home, and I was putting in the context of within a 2-week period or something, or even a few days. But sometimes as things go on and go on and go on, and you've sort of utilized the support system, the family and everything else, we look at maybe a short stay, which we call a respite. Respite can be arranged at home. Maybe that's what a homemaker's coming in on a scheduled time to give you a break to go out or whatever. But we also can look for extended periods of time, like maybe the person needs a week, the caregiver needs a week off, and wants to be able to go and see a grandson, understanding that there still could be an event that would change that plan. But sometimes you work through that part and you say, we say put their life on hold as these things go on. And we use a short stay, yes, sometimes in the hospital, but more and more we're trying to look at utilizing a respite bed that we have available in the community at one of the facilities. And that's used particularly for caregivers so that they can take a planned break. And it certainly also, it's not only for those that are looking after somebody with a chronic illness, it's for those who perhaps have taken on the responsibility of supporting their person at home who has a terminal illness, and then they need that kind of a break. And the hardest part is to convince them to take it, because they say, what if? And again, you can't predict, but you have to say, well, you've had maybe 6 months like this and you haven't had a break. We think it's important. Can you be reached by phone? Or, sometimes they're just wanting to go to Kelowna, and that's not too far to come back, or maybe, a flight back from Edmonton or something like that. So we do still have that as an option, sometimes like that real break, a physical break where the person has a short admission into a respite bed. Yeah.
Raeburn, at break, Sarah asked me, one of her friends up in Castle had a husband, Sarah, that was
Husband who was dying of cancer, and she was told that she just had so many days over a period of 6 months that she could put her husband in the hospital so that she could get away. This was a few years back.
I could see somebody maybe saying that there's 30 days that are available. That's actually what we use as the number for a short stay. It's broken up maybe into 30 days, broken up into 7-day, 3-day, 5-day breaks, but that's kind of what the continuing care division and long-term care program would indicate is, yes, but it's usually pertaining to people who are at home with a chronic illness, which again, a terminal illness is not usually a chronic illness, but it's usually those that they're getting ongoing help at home, and this is an added bonus to that ongoing help at home. So that's where that 30 days comes in.
It's 30 days over what period?
A year.
A year?
Mm-hmm. But it isn't broken up into months, but we have some where we've arranged breaks every 2 months for 2 weeks, and we look at these situations, and currently in this community we can certainly try and arrange that every 2 to 3 months for a couple of weeks and build on that. The 30 days is a correct number. Often that's, though, again, used for people who are in a nursing home who want to take a holiday themselves and get out, and we say, well, their bed will be held for 30 days, so. But I think like everything, yeah, I know, but I think that I would have wanted to review that. I mean, you know, I can see where someone might have said 30 days, but I mean, usually, you know, if we're talking about an end stage, we look at, they never would take 30 days, take a few days a week.
I would like to ask if anybody has ever requested that the body not be removed as soon as possible. Are there limits to that?
You keep a body at home as long as you want to. Have people stay with the body at home for overnight or several hours, or it's just whatever people are comfortable with. Some people, right after the person has died, they want the body removed. Other people really want to have that time to say goodbye. It's personal choice.
Yeah, it's a religious right too. I remember one young fellow who died of lymphoma who was being looked after by his church group and friend, and they, in fact, I think, kept his body there and prepared it themselves and took it off with them from there to their ceremony. It gets a little stickier legally as to that sort of thing, but those are not insurmountable hurdles by any means.
It's actually the Dumont Burial Society up in the valley that actually will do, if you're a member of the society, they will actually come to the hospital, prepare the body, build the casket, and bury it on a beautiful little spot behind the moon loft. It's got something like 10,000 daffodils in the burial spot now, but they'll do that all for them, come in and bathe the body, but it all has to be arranged legally. You have to have the death certificate, you have to have the whatever documentation you have to have for any regular burial, and it's redone by this, like a burial society. I think the Friends up in, yeah, we have a similar arrangement up there, I think, in Magenta.
My mother died at Willowhaven, and we went down. They always had a casket and a pine box, and they went down with a pine box and picked my mother up and took her back up in the back of a truck, and then back up and
Three provinces, we found out it was a little hard for someone to transport their mother back to Alberta for burial, and it was, I don't know what they ever did to surmount that.
There you had to have your lawyer, I think.
Yeah. In local, it's a choice a lot of more people are making, especially in the valley.
So if you have someone dying at home, who tells you about all these things? Who to go to for the death certificate and legal things if you want alternative burial? Who does that? Tells you?
I don't know of any single resource, you know. I just kind of know the legal steps from my point of view, but then I
We've got it all written down in home care.
Then I just hand all my paperwork to somebody like a funeral home, and it disappears. But it's gone.
There was an elderly man in Nelson. This is all I know about him. And he was available for anybody who was curious about this, and he had it all down, you know, who you let know, where you send the death certificate, and they'll return it. But you don't save this one to the last one to send the death certificate because they won't return it. And he had this all down, you know, 1, 2, 3. And I've been trying to find his name, but the person who told me has since died, and I don't have his name.
You could find almost all that information from the Dumont Burial Society without being a member there. And we do have that information at the house unit there. A real good resource for information like that. And actually, they will bury people from outside their society, but they prefer not to because it is a lot of work. It's all done by volunteers, but they are wonderful.
What is your name?
Dumont Burial Society. I'm saying it is Dumont. I always want to call it Duhamel, so yeah, Dumont is great. I always call it Duhamel, and you're correct me. So yeah, it's a very personalized thing.
I think too, recognizing cultural and religious differences different people have different beliefs at the time of death. And even, I know when my friend died in Victoria, the hospital was extremely accommodating to those cultural needs and allowed the family to say their goodbyes in their own time, and allowed the family to wash and perfume the body, and allowed the family to wrap the body in linen for preparation for burial, which was a cultural ritual tradition for their religious values. And the hospital was very accommodating and very understanding. So it was, just as well in the hospital as it had been at home. There was no problem. The hospital was quite nice.
Anybody else got any questions?
You alluded to less successful home deaths. Are they mostly because of poor planning, or what would you say, are pitfalls to avoid?
I think perhaps probably to poor planning more than anything else. Perhaps poor psychological preparation.
Some people don't have family. do
Well,
they?
that's right, and they of course are going to have trouble.
And lots that die very young.
They're going to have trouble dying at home without some kind of support system. But the things that hopefully a home death gives all the people in the family a chance to sort of work through their grieving process and their guilt and their, the undone business in life and all of those things. But if in fact the time has not been used to do that, then you can walk into a situation where the family members are all of a sudden faced with the fact that this guy's now died, and you didn't tell us he was going to die so soon. No, we'd have done this if we'd known he was going to die so soon. He's been dying for a week, and it just sort of I guess my experience is the most stressful things are trying to deal with people's unwashed guilt, if you like, or whatever their reaction or anger is. People will get angry. All those steps in the Kubler-Ross grief thing, you're going to get them at different times. When the event's there, it could be denial, it could be anger, it could be outright depression. That's usually the psychological things which are difficult more than the physical management.
We had one young family that the young woman with young children, young husband, other family members involved that were never ever, right up to the day she died, I think, ever able to talk about the fact that she was dying. And one of the hospice workers basically had to tell the children because no one else, and they never talked amongst each other, which was very hard on the hospice worker and very hard on the family. They were all, the whole thing of family secrets. Everybody was keeping secrets. We did most of our talking with the family out in the driveway because they all had these concerns, they all had these fears, they all had everything. So, and of course, because they weren't giving her permission to be open, she was trying to protect all of them, so she wasn't talking, and that was a little more difficult. I mean, they were all very supportive and everything, but there was never nobody sort of said goodbye because nobody ever let it down enough where you could.
Some of the family game playing that carries on right through that.
Yeah, it's part of the way they coped all their lives.
All the time, It's hard to make change at the end if your style has been this one way, and that's just the way it is. We like to say that good communication skills are so important for any aspect of change or adjustment that you have to make, but we all have our own particular styles, and the worst thing is we can give the information. I think that I often feel the information has been given, but it hasn't been received, and then the experience is different once they've gone home, and then they start to maybe think they could access it, but sometimes they've run out of time, and then they feel a real burden. But it is often true. We often, recognize that there are limits to what a person can understand given their particular style, and we have to respect that we're going to have some that just don't go that well, but maybe it went well for them. It's maybe.
In terms of planning, by the way, just on that issue, in terms of of communication skills, one of the things that I find very important is to find out very quickly in a palliative care situation as to who is the designated executor and who is going to be making the decisions about this person, and designate him as the spokesperson for the family, so that I can discharge any sort of communication with a single person, as opposed to having to talk on the telephone individually to all 15 siblings or down the line. You know, that one person who's acceptable to everybody is designated as the core person, and that's the person that you focus on and communicate through and with, and who comes back with relevant questions, and how a family, given the way families are, how a family elects who that person is that everybody trusts and likes, and who's going to get the information straight is tough.
I think that's quite important. I experienced that, being the eldest one in the family, that they all turned to me, the nurse and the doctor and everything, it was all to me.
Yeah.
Well, I took it all, at the time. But it made it easier for the other siblings and relatives.
I think this is what a responsibility each one of us has, is to let it be known, who you want to take care of. I mean, you have a will, who do you want to take care of it? Who's doing a memorial service or whatever. This is our responsibility, it seems.
Yeah, the living will aspect is very important, and it's frightening how many people still go to their death not having acknowledged the fact they're going to die ever, even if they're 95, without a will. Just a straightforward document.
Another point of interest, they just come out with a new do not resuscitate, and you'll...
Oh, good. I love it. More paper.
It's the same. You only have to sign one. It's the same as always, and we'll fill in all the blanks for you, like always. But in this, it's in our policy manual. It's about 4 pages about do not resuscitate orders, and one of the things that they say that if the client isn't able to make the decision for themselves, they now have to sign these forms, which
that's going to be interesting.
yeah, but that the caregivers, whoever gets the signature on this, is to take into consideration a living will, and it's the first time I've ever seen that put down anywhere where that will be. I mean, it's still not, I don't think, a legal document from my understanding. Where it could be fought in court, but by that time it's probably illegal. But that they are starting to recognize, and I think in Ontario it has gone through this quasi-legal document, so moving that direction.
Sounds to me like it would really be easier to put off having to sign that paper than until after the person's shown compass mentis.
We'll get it done. We'll make you do it.
Dying with Dignity has a sheet. I don't know whether you've seen it or not, but it has a sheet. Under these conditions, if this is the conditions, then this is what I want to happen.
Right.
If these are the conditions, because there's more than one way that we can.
Yeah, there are some that have designated, if this, then this, if this, then that. Good.
Actually, tomorrow night here at the hospice will be presenting Dr. Reed and lawyer Scogston talking about living wills.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was really Scogston. But anyway, the lawyer and the doctor talking about living wills.
They're not legal yet, you said?
I don't think so. I don't think in law they're legal, but I think most doctors now do accept them as being
the
a
last
good
wishes
guideline.
like that.
Yeah.
Have you had experience with children dying at home?
Fortunately, I can't say I've had a lot. I've had sort of second-hand experience of a couple that I had not had first-hand experience of dealing. And those are the worst. I think those are the most wrenching tragedies that you're ever going to ever get involved in. Children dying, and that takes a very special group of people. Fortunately,
I would think it would be difficult because of the parent wanting to choose which way to do it for the child, but also giving the child, if older enough, to give the choice.
Yeah, I think the basic principle there is deny the kid nothing. It's a good time to spoil.
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop the tremendous emotional wrench. A dying child.
When a person dies, who takes the decision he can die at home?
He does, basically.
If the family doesn't know what happened.
If the family doesn't want, and the patient
Because
says,
they cannot, you know,
if the
Yeah.
patient,
If-
if the patient says, I want to go home, and the family says, I'm not looking after you, then we're stuck. The patient, if it can't set up a support system, then the patient,
Time for family conference.
it's time to have a little powwow and sort that
but
out.
first it's the patient himself.
Yeah, I think the patient has to agree that that's where he wants to be. I don't think one would lug the patient home against his will.
It's done in concert though, usually. Usually there is a support person, whether it's a very small family or just a good friend, and you have to make this decision together. Look, you've got a couple of choices here. You can spend your time here, or if you think you could manage at home, we can get other people to help you set up being at home. Yeah, because it's certainly true. If one person says, I want that, and the patient is scared and just doesn't want to do that, and they just won't go for it, or they'll sabotage a plan that you do make. And we've had experience with that, where, you know, we tried to set up things because that was a wish of somebody, but then it wasn't really determined, you know, in the end, who really wanted to go home.
We've talked at other meetings like this about sort of looking ahead to the future. I mean, when we talk about dying at home, we often think about in terms of cancer as being a death, but more and more we're getting patients who are sort of end-stage hearts who drag on for years and years at home, and certainly another place where palliation might be useful. And I honestly think that we will probably be shocked in the next 10 years to see how much call there is for hospice in the management palliation of dying AIDS patients.
Dying AIDS patients.
AIDS patients. And I think that probably as hospice workers you want to sort out your feelings of being involved in those situations, because those are certainly it's a disease that's going to cut across all ages. That will be taking everything from children up to full adults.
Do you have any more questions?
I'd like to hear about some of the successful, loving, creative ways families have resolved their emotions together before death, from your experience.
I think probably the same way as it's so individual, family to family, people that are very close and open to a lot of talking, people that aren't, don't, but probably everyone in this room comes from a slightly different type of background. I come from a family that doesn't talk, except for me, I cry. And I get head full of jokes and stuff. How do you say that? I hardly ever open my mouth. But my mom talks a lot, but when my grandma died, she was old and I was expecting her to die, and we went home to her funeral, and I started to sob raucously at her funeral. And my dad just kept looking at me with horror, and then about a year later my dad died, and I bet you 5 times before we got in it, my mom was, don't you be carrying on like you did at your grandma's funeral, I don't want that. So if I'd even go, she wouldn't like that. So we never talked. You know, I talked, and I was able to talk to my mom before my dad died. We'd opened up a lot. But my brothers, well, I've got one brother that still doesn't talk about my dad. He's been dead for 5 years and walks out of the room. So my family dynamics haven't changed. Other friends that we've had that, well, back to that saying, because they're closer to me than anybody, they had guitars around the bed, they sang, they talked. The best way I think I recommend for getting people to talk is the good old photo book. Photo album, that's the word I want people. Just bring it out and start looking at pictures from their past, baby pictures, all the way through. And you know, they might still not say much more, except gives you an opportunity to say, remember how much fun we had at the beach when we went on that holiday, and gee, we had a good time then, and you know, and I think even in a hospital that type of thing can be done. And even if you're not a person that can say, I love you, you can say it when you're looking at pictures or playing music or reading a book or all kinds of ways, you know. And my father would have been quite appalled if I'd sat there sobbing and blithering on at his bedside. I mean, he would have been so embarrassed he'd have pulled the covers over his head. But the fact that I was there and actually gave him a kiss goodbye before I left his bedside would probably spoke volumes, because that's something that our family doesn't do. So I think everybody sort of does it their own way, and it's not something you can regulate. You can help lead. A hospice worker can, or a home care nurse, or a doctor can lead people through, gee, where'd you grow up? How old were you when your sister was born? Just to get them to talk about their family. But if people aren't used to really talking, they're probably not going to do it then. People just don't change, in my experience.
Yeah, boy, if music is part of somebody's background, I tell you, music is a terribly powerful tool in terms of getting things to open up and people to learn and grieve well. So very, very powerful tool.
And I think sometimes you have to accept that in some families there isn't resolution of already fragmented groups within a family or whatever is the support system that we might like to feel that we can see struggles within a family group when you're interacting with them, but you may not be able to change that. But sometimes just talking one-on-one, the fact that they're there might have been the biggest hurdle, that they are there and maybe they spend more of their time in the kitchen, they can't sort of resolve that part. There's always the Marthas that are going to do the preparation and the Marys.
The sister-in-law will do the cooking while you're watching at the bedside. That's
So
what
sometimes
I've
their styles are just a little different, and I think that, I've seen some families that one doesn't talk, but he's there, and the family recognized that his strengths were that years ago he did things for Dad, and that they were able to pull that out as saying, but remember you were there, you were able to do this, I understand where you are right now. The best ones are where families just get along. I mean, isn't that true of many decisions, But death can bring families together, but it doesn't always resolve the issues. There can still be some ongoing hurts. They might pull together for that moment, but I guess we have to be realistic to say sometimes it doesn't change the dynamic. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's the agent for change, and they come together and then celebrate life.
And sometimes miserable people die miserable too. I mean, if they've treated their family in a terrible manner all their life, it's very unlikely there's going to be a deathbed turnaround. They're going to be just as bossy and aggravating, except that the people that are dealing with them feel a lot more guilty about it.
Yeah, and that's a struggle.
Yeah, I think to be perfectly honest, the ugliest thing to have to see, of course, is a family that starts fighting over the deathbed like a pack of vultures over an estate. That's just, you sort of sit down and throw up your hands and walk away.
Or it's hard, those situations where there's been a real long estrangement, and yet there is a son or a daughter, and so they're called maybe from the hospital or something, and they haven't had a relationship, and it's so hard to have to then deal with this event now, but they were called, they were family, or they're called, they're listed as a next of kin. They say, I haven't seen my mom for 25 years, and they're sort of called upon to make decisions because there's been no legal changes or anything with regard to management of their case. That stuff, I think we've seen those before. So the best thing is to keep your relationships in a good state and
let everybody know what you want before you decide to die.
Anyway, I'd like to thank our three guests for being so helpful tonight, and hopefully you all came away with some of what you came to learn, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And taking more hospice kids.
Thank you for organizing us.
You organized it.